The morning sun crept through the old chapel windows, casting golden light across the wooden pews. Sister Margaret knelt in her usual spot, third row from the front, right side. She had been kneeling in that exact place for 62 years. Her knees ached these days, and her back complained with every movement. But she never missed morning prayers. Not once in all those decades. At 84 years old, Sister Margaret was the oldest nun at St. Catherine's Convent. The younger sisters treated her with kindness, always offering to carry things for her or help her up the stairs. They saw a fragile old woman with silver hair tucked beneath her veil, hands that trembled when she held her rosary, and eyes that had grown cloudy with age. They loved her, of course. Everyone at the convent loved Sister Margaret, but they also thought they knew everything about her. They were wrong. The convent sat on a gentle hill overlooking a small village in the Irish countryside. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where news traveled faster than the wind, and where secrets were nearly impossible to keep. Nearly impossible, but not completely. Some secrets, when buried deep enough and long enough, simply fade from memory. Sister Margaret's secret had been buried for more than 6 decades. After morning prayers, she made her way to the garden behind the chapel. This was her favorite place in the world. She had planted most of these flowers herself over the years, roses in red and white, lavender that filled the air with sweetness, and rows of vegetables that fed the sisters throughout the summer months. Gardening kept her hands busy. It kept her mind quiet, and most importantly, it kept her away from the one thing she had promised herself she would never touch again: the piano in the main hall. It was a beautiful instrument, a grand piano that had been donated to the convent decades ago by a wealthy family from Dublin. The sisters used it occasionally for hymns and holiday celebrations. Sometimes the children from the local school would come and play simple songs during Christmas time. Sister Margaret always found a reason to be somewhere else when the piano was being played. She would excuse herself to check on the garden, or claim she needed rest, or simply slip away without explanation. No one ever questioned it. Why would they? She was just an old nun who preferred quiet solitude. There was nothing unusual about that, but the truth was far more complicated. Before she was Sister Margaret, she had been someone else entirely. Her name was Maggie O'Brien, and she had been born with a gift that only appears once in a generation. By the age of 5, she could play piano pieces that grown musicians struggled to master. By 12, she was performing in concert halls across Ireland. By 19, she had done something that seemed impossible for a young woman from a tiny village. She had played at Carnegie Hall in New York City. The critics had called her extraordinary. They said her fingers moved like water flowing over stones, natural and effortless. They said listening to her play was like hearing someone speak directly to your soul. One famous reviewer wrote that Maggie O'Brien was not just playing music, she was breathing life into it. For a few brief years, the world had been at her feet. She had everything a young musician could dream of: fame, opportunity, and a future brighter than the stage lights that illuminated her performances. She also had love, or at least she thought she did. His name does not matter anymore. What matters is that he promised her forever, and then he left without a word. She woke up one morning to find his side of the bed empty, his belongings gone, and a short note that said only, "I am sorry. I cannot do this." That was it. No explanation, no goodbye. Just 7 words that shattered her world into pieces. Maggie tried to keep playing after that. She sat at her piano day after day, but the music would not come. Her fingers knew where to go, but her heart had forgotten why it mattered. Every note reminded her of him. Every melody brought back memories she desperately wanted to forget. The piano that had once been her greatest joy became a source of unbearable pain. She canceled her performances. She stopped answering letters from concert halls begging her to return. She locked herself away and wondered if she would ever feel whole again. It was during this dark time that she found her way to St. Catherine's. She had come only to pray, to seek some kind of peace in the quiet of the chapel. But something happened during that first visit. As she knelt before the altar, tears streaming down her face, she felt a warmth wrap around her like a blanket. She heard no voice, saw no vision, But she knew with absolute certainty that she was not alone, that she had never been alone. She took her vows 6 months later. She became Sister Margaret, and Maggie O'Brien disappeared from the world. The newspapers wrote confused articles, wondering what had happened to the brilliant young pianist. Some said she had moved to another country. Others claimed she had fallen ill. Eventually, people stopped asking. New talents emerged. The world moved on, and Sister Margaret found peace in her new life. She found purpose in prayer, in service, in the simple rhythm of convent days. She convinced herself that music had been a chapter of her life that was now closed. She did not need it anymore. She had God, and that was enough. Or so she told herself. The truth was more complicated. Late at night, when the other sisters were asleep, Sister Margaret would sometimes lie awake and hear music in her mind. Symphonies and sonatas would play in her imagination, as vivid as if a full orchestra were performing just outside her window. Her fingers would twitch against her blanket, moving through invisible keys. In those moments, she missed the piano so deeply that it felt like a physical ache in her chest. But she never gave in, not once in 62 years, until the day everything changed. It started with an announcement during evening meal. Mother Superior stood at the head of the long dining table, her face serious but hopeful. "Sisters, I have news," she said. "As you know, the orphanage in the village has been struggling. They have received word that unless they can raise enough money by the end of next month, they will be forced to close their doors. 43 children will lose their home." A murmur of concern rippled through the room. Everyone knew the orphanage. Many of the sisters volunteered there, teaching the children to read and helping with meals. "Those children were like family. We have decided to organize a charity concert," Mother Superior continued. "We will invite donors from across the region. We will have music, performances, and we will ask for their generosity. It will be held right here, in our cathedral." The younger sisters began talking excitedly about plans and preparations. Someone mentioned hiring a professional pianist from Dublin. Someone else suggested a youth choir. Ideas flew back and forth across the table. Sister Margaret sat in silence, her soup growing cold in front of her. Her heart was beating strangely fast. A concert. Music. The piano. For 62 years, she had kept her distance. She had built walls around that part of herself, brick by brick, until she almost believed the walls were permanent. But now, sitting in that dining hall, listening to her sisters plan a concert to save orphaned children, she felt something she had not felt in decades. A crack in the wall. It was small, barely noticeable. But it was there. And somewhere deep inside her, in a place she had tried so hard to forget, a tiny flame flickered back to life. Sister Margaret closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she was too old, too out of practice, too far removed from that world. But her fingers, resting in her lap beneath the table, had already begun to move. Silently, instinctively, playing notes that only she could hear. 3 days passed after the announcement, and the convent buzzed with excitement. Everywhere Sister Margaret went, she heard conversations about the charity concert. The younger sisters had thrown themselves into planning with energy and enthusiasm. They made lists, sent letters to potential donors, and debated which hymns would be most appropriate for the evening. Sister Margaret watched all of this from a distance. She continued her daily routines. Morning prayers, tending the garden, helping in the kitchen during mealtimes. But something had shifted inside her. That small crack in the wall she had built around her heart was growing wider with each passing day. At night, she found herself unable to sleep. She would lie in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, and memories would flood back uninvited. She remembered the feel of piano keys beneath her fingers, smooth and cool. She remembered the way an audience would fall completely silent the moment she began to play. She remembered the joy, pure and overwhelming, that used to fill her chest when music flowed through her. 62 years. That was how long she had denied herself that joy. And for what? Because a man had broken her heart when she was young and foolish? Because she had convinced herself that she needed to choose between God and music? Lying there in the darkness, Sister Margaret began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. On the fourth day, she made a decision. She would speak to the sisters organizing the concert. She would offer to help, not with refreshments or decorations, but with the one thing she had spent a lifetime hiding. She would offer to play. The thought terrified her. Her hands were not what they used to be. Arthritis had stiffened her fingers, and she had not touched a piano in more than 6 decades. What if she had forgotten everything? What if she sat down to play and nothing came out but clumsy, broken sounds? The embarrassment would be unbearable. But something stronger than fear was pushing her forward. Call it faith. Call it destiny. Call it the simple human need to be useful. Whatever it was, Sister Margaret could not ignore it any longer. She found the planning committee in the small meeting room near the library. 4 sisters sat around a wooden table covered with papers and notebooks. They ranged in age from 30 to 50, all of them capable and confident. Sister Bernadette, the oldest of the group at 52, seemed to be leading the discussion. She had a kind face and a practical manner that made her well suited for organizing events. Sister Margaret stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she knocked gently on the open door. "Excuse me," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "May I speak with you for a moment?" The sisters looked up with expressions of mild surprise. It was unusual for Sister Margaret to seek anyone out. She was known for keeping to herself, for being quiet and unassuming. Some of the younger nuns privately wondered if she was simply too old to engage much with convent life anymore. "Of course, Sister Margaret," said Sister Bernadette warmly. "Please, come in. What can we do for you?" Sister Margaret stepped into the room. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She clasped her hands together to stop them from trembling. "I wanted to ask about the concert," she began. "I understand you are looking for musicians to perform." Sister Bernadette nodded. "Yes. We have been working on the program. We have contacted a professional pianist from Dublin. A lovely young woman. Very talented. She has agreed to perform several classical pieces, and the children from the village school will sing a few songs." "That sounds wonderful," Sister Margaret said. She paused, struggling to find the right words. "I was wondering if perhaps I might also contribute. Musically, I mean." The room went quiet. The 4 sisters exchanged glances that Sister Margaret could not quite read. Was it confusion? Surprise? Something else? Sister Bernadette leaned forward slightly, her expression gentle but uncertain. "That is very kind of you to offer, Sister. Do you mean you would like to sing with the children?" "No," Sister Margaret said. "I mean the piano. I would like to play the piano." Another silence followed. This one felt heavier, more awkward. One of the younger sisters, a woman in her early 30s, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She glanced at Sister Bernadette, as if seeking guidance on how to respond. "Sister Margaret," Sister Bernadette said carefully, "we truly appreciate your enthusiasm. It means so much that you want to help. But the piano performance is quite important to the evening. We have donors coming from across the region. The bishop himself will be attending. We need someone with recent experience, someone who has been practicing regularly." "I understand," Sister Margaret said quietly. "Have you played recently?" another sister asked. Her tone was not unkind, but there was doubt written all over her face. Sister Margaret hesitated. She could not lie. Not here. Not to her sisters in faith. "No," she admitted. "It has been many years." The sisters nodded as if this confirmed what they had already suspected. An 84-year-old woman who had not played piano in years could not possibly perform at an important charity event. It simply was not practical. "Perhaps there are other ways you could contribute," Sister Bernadette suggested gently. "We could use help with the refreshment table, or greeting guests as they arrive. Your presence alone would be a blessing to the evening." Sister Margaret looked around the table at the four faces watching her. She saw kindness there. Genuine kindness. But she also saw something else. She saw the way they looked at her trembling hands. She saw the pity in their eyes. They did not mean to be cruel. They simply could not imagine that she had anything valuable to offer. They did not know. How could they? She had never told anyone about her past. She had buried Maggie O'Brien so completely that even she sometimes forgot that woman had ever existed. For a brief moment, Sister Margaret considered telling them the truth. She imagined saying the words out loud. I played at Carnegie Hall. Critics called me the most gifted pianist of my generation. I was someone once, someone extraordinary, but the words stuck in her throat. 62 years of silence could not be broken so easily. And besides, what did it matter now? She was old. Her fingers were stiff. The world had moved on without her. Thank you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I will think about how else I might help. She turned and walked out of the room before anyone could see the tears forming in her eyes. That evening, Sister Margaret did not join the others for dinner. She told Mother Superior she was feeling tired and went to her room early. But she did not sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap, and stared at the wall. The rejection hurt more than she had expected. Not because the sisters had been unkind. They had been perfectly polite, even considerate. What hurt was the realization of what she had allowed herself to become. An old woman who was offered a seat at the refreshment table because no one believed she had anything else to give. Was that really all she was now, after everything she had once been? Late that night, when the convent was silent and dark, Sister Margaret made her way to the chapel. She knelt before the altar, alone with her thoughts and her prayers. The moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting patterns of blue and red and gold across the stone floor. I gave it up for you, she whispered into the silence. I thought that was what you wanted. I thought I had to choose. No answer came. Of course it did not. God rarely answered in words. But as Sister Margaret knelt there in the darkness, she felt something shift inside her once again. The crack in her wall grew wider still. She had spent 62 years running from who she was. Maybe it was time to stop running. Sister Margaret rose slowly, her knees protesting as always. She dried her eyes with the edge of her sleeve and walked out of the chapel. As she passed the main hall, she paused. The piano sat there in the moonlight, silent and waiting. She stood looking at it for a long time. Then she turned away and went to bed. But she did not sleep. And in her mind, the music played on. The weeks leading up to the concert passed quickly. The convent transformed into a place of constant activity. Sisters hurried through hallways carrying flowers, candles, and decorations. The cathedral was cleaned from floor to ceiling until every surface gleamed. Invitations went out to donors, politicians, and community leaders from across the region. The response was overwhelming. More than 300 people confirmed they would attend. Sister Margaret kept to herself during this time. She helped where she was asked, folding napkins and polishing silverware for the reception that would follow the performance. She did not complain. She did not mention the piano again. But inside, something continued to stir. Every night, she found herself drawn to the main hall after the other sisters had gone to bed. She would stand in the doorway and look at the piano, never touching it, never sitting down, just looking. Sometimes she would stay there for an hour or more, remembering what it had felt like to play, remembering who she used to be. The night before the concert, a storm rolled in from the coast. Rain hammered against the convent windows, and wind howled through the trees surrounding the property. Sister Margaret lay awake listening to the thunder, her stomach tight with a feeling she could not name. Something was coming. She could sense it the way old bones can sense a change in the weather. Morning arrived, gray and wet. The storm had passed, but it had left damage in its wake. Tree branches littered the roads, and reports came in of flooding in the lower parts of the county. Still, the sisters pressed forward with their preparations. The concert would go on. Too much depended on it. By late afternoon, guests began arriving at the cathedral. They came in fine cars and elegant clothes, shaking rain from their umbrellas as they entered. The bishop arrived in his ceremonial robes, greeting the sisters with warm handshakes and words of encouragement. Local politicians posed for photographs near the entrance. Wealthy donors from Dublin examined the cathedral with appreciative eyes. Sister Margaret watched from a corner near the back, wearing her simple habit, feeling invisible among all the important people. She was supposed to be helping with refreshments, but she could not bring herself to leave the main room. Not yet, not when the piano sat there on the small stage that had been built for the evening, waiting for someone to bring it to life. The children from the village school arrived next, 15 boys and girls in matching white shirts, nervous and excited. They would perform 3 songs as part of the program. Their teacher, a young woman with a patient smile, guided them to their seats in the front row. Everything was in place. Everything except one thing. At 6:30, half an hour before the concert was scheduled to begin, Sister Bernadette's face went pale. She was standing near the entrance, holding a telephone to her ear. And even from across the room, Sister Margaret could see that something was terribly wrong. Sister Bernadette hung up the phone and immediately gathered the other organizers into a tight circle. Their voices were low and urgent. Sister Margaret could not hear what they were saying, but she could see the panic spreading across their faces. She moved closer, staying in the shadows, listening. Her car broke down, Sister Bernadette was saying, her voice shaking. Somewhere past Galway. A tree fell on the road during the storm. She cannot get through. There is no way she will make it in time. What are we going to do? One of the younger sisters asked. The concert starts in 30 minutes. The children cannot sing without piano accompaniment. Can we delay? Push back the start time? The bishop has another engagement at 9. He cannot stay late, and the donors came from all over. We cannot ask them to wait for hours. The sisters looked at each other with growing desperation. 300 guests filled the cathedral. The future of the orphanage depended on this night. And they had no pianist. There must be someone, Sister Bernadette said. Someone local who can play. Anyone. Who? The school teacher plays a little, but nothing like what we need. The program calls for classical pieces. We cannot have someone stumbling through simple tunes in front of the bishop. Silence fell over the group. In the cathedral behind them, guests chatted and laughed. Unaware that the entire evening was falling apart, Sister Margaret stood frozen in the shadows. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. This was the moment. She knew it with a certainty that went beyond thought, beyond reason. This was why she had not been able to sleep. This was what she had been sensing in her bones. 62 years of silence, 62 years of hiding. And now, when it mattered most, she had a choice to make. Her hands were trembling. Her fingers ached with the stiffness of age. She had not touched a piano since she was 22 years old. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her body failed her when she needed it most? But then she thought of the children at the orphanage. 43 boys and girls who would lose their home if this concert failed. She thought of their faces, their laughter, the way they ran to greet the sisters whenever they visited. Those children had no one else. The world had already let them down once. She could not let them down again. Sister Margaret stepped out of the shadows. "I can play," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the noise of the crowded cathedral. But somehow, the sisters heard her. They turned, all of them, and stared at the old woman standing before them. "Sister Margaret," Sister Bernadette began, her tone gentle but strained. "This is not the time for, 'I can play,'" Sister Margaret repeated, stronger this time. "I know the pieces on the program. I know them by heart." The sisters exchanged uncertain glances. They did not know what to say. They had already dismissed her once, kindly but firmly. And now, here she was again, offering the impossible. "Sister, please understand," one of the younger nuns said carefully. "We appreciate your willingness to help. We truly do. But this is a very important evening. The bishop is here. The donors are expecting—" "I know what they are expecting," Sister Margaret interrupted. Her voice had changed. There was something in it now, something that had not been there before. a quiet strength, a certainty. And I am telling you that I can give it to them. Please, let me try. Mother Superior had been standing nearby, listening to the entire exchange. She was a woman of 70 years, wise and observant, and she had led this convent for more than 2 decades. In all that time, she had never heard Sister Margaret speak with such conviction. There had always been something mysterious about Sister Margaret. Rumors had circulated for years among the older sisters. Whispers about her past, about a life before the convent that no one fully understood. Mother Superior had never pressed for details. She believed that everyone deserved their secrets. But now, looking into Sister Margaret's eyes, she saw something she had never seen before. She saw fire. "Let her play," Mother Superior said quietly. The other sisters turned to her in surprise. "Mother, are you certain?" Sister Bernadette asked. "If this goes poorly, then it goes poorly," Mother Superior said. "But we have no other choice. And I have a feeling that Sister Margaret knows more than she has told us." She looked at the old nun with a gaze that was both questioning and encouraging. Sister Margaret met her eyes and nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. The sisters stepped aside, clearing a path to the stage. The cathedral stretched out before her, filled with 300 faces, 300 pairs of eyes that would soon be watching her every move. Sister Margaret took a deep breath and began to walk toward the piano. Her legs felt weak. Her hands would not stop shaking. Every step seemed to take an eternity, but she kept walking, because somewhere inside her, beneath all the years of silence and hiding, Maggie O'Brien was still alive. And tonight, after 62 years, she was finally going to play again. The walk from the back of the cathedral to the stage felt like the longest journey of Sister Margaret's life. Each step echoed against the stone floor. 300 guests turned in their seats to watch her, and she could feel their eyes on her like a physical weight. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who is that? Is she part of the program? She looks so old. Surely she is not the pianist." Sister Margaret kept her gaze fixed on the piano. She could not allow herself to look at the faces around her. If she saw their doubt, their confusion, their polite concern, she might lose her courage entirely. So she focused on the instrument waiting for her at the end of the aisle. The black wood gleaming under the soft lights. The white and black keys that had once been as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Near the front row, the bishop leaned toward Mother Superior with a questioning look. She gave him a small nod that seemed to say, "Trust me." He settled back in his seat, but his expression remained uncertain. The children from the village school watched with wide eyes. They did not understand what was happening. They only knew that the nice old nun who sometimes brought them cookies was walking toward the big piano, and all the grown-ups seemed worried about it. Sister Margaret reached the stage. 3 wooden steps led up to the platform where the piano sat. She placed her hand on the railing and climbed slowly, carefully. Her knees ached. Her back protested, but she made it to the top without stumbling. The piano bench waited for her. She stood beside it for a moment, looking down at the keys. They seemed to glow in the light, inviting her, calling her back to a world she had abandoned so long ago. She sat down. The bench creaked slightly under her weight. She adjusted her position, moving closer to the keys, finding the right distance. Muscle memory stirred somewhere deep inside her, guiding her movements, even after all these years. The cathedral fell silent. Complete, absolute silence. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the rustle of fabric. 300 people held their breath, waiting to see what this frail old woman would do. Sister Margaret placed her hands on her lap. She looked down at them. These hands that had once danced across keyboards in concert halls around the world. They were so different now. Wrinkled and spotted with age, fingers slightly bent from arthritis, veins visible beneath papery skin. Could they still remember? After 62 years, could they still find their way? She closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she was not Sister Margaret anymore. She was Maggie again. Young Maggie, standing backstage at Carnegie Hall, heart racing with excitement and fear. She remembered the moment before she walked out to perform, the moment when everything was possible, when the music inside her was bursting to be released. She had felt so alive then. So completely, perfectly alive. Sister Margaret opened her eyes. She lifted her hands from her lap and placed them on the keys. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Her fingers rested on the cool ivory, motionless. The silence in the cathedral grew heavier. She could sense the audience shifting uncomfortably. She could feel their pity, their embarrassment on her behalf. Some of them were probably already looking for a polite way to end this awkward scene. But then something changed. It started deep inside her chest, a warmth that spread outward through her arms and into her hands. The music that had lived inside her all these years, locked away but never truly gone, began to wake up. It moved through her like blood, like breath, like prayer. She pressed the first key. The note rang out through the cathedral, pure and clear and perfect. It hung in the air like a living thing, filling every corner of the vast space. And then she played the second note, and the third. And suddenly her fingers were moving on their own, flying across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for a woman of her age. She was playing Chopin. Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the same piece she had performed at Carnegie Hall 65 years ago, on the night that had made her famous. The notes poured out of her like water breaking through a dam, unstoppable, overwhelming, beautiful beyond words. The audience sat frozen in shock. Whatever they had expected, it was not this. This was not an old woman fumbling through a simple hymn. This was mastery. This was genius. This was something most of them had never witnessed in their entire lives. In the front row, the bishop's mouth fell open. He forgot all dignity, all composure. He simply stared at the stage, unable to believe what he was hearing. Sister Bernadette pressed both hands over her mouth. Tears were already forming in her eyes. Just days ago, she had gently suggested that this woman help with refreshments. She had looked at those trembling hands and seen only age and limitation. How wrong she had been. How terribly, wonderfully wrong. The music built and swelled, filling the cathedral with emotions that words could never capture. There was sadness in it, deep and aching, the sadness of a young woman whose heart had been shattered. There was longing, the longing of decades spent in silence. Years of music locked away and yearning to be free. But there was also joy. Pure, radiant joy. The joy of coming home. After a lifetime of wandering, Sister Margaret played with her eyes closed now. She did not need to see the keys. Her hands knew where to go. They had always known. The 62 years of silence melted away as if they had never happened. She was not an old nun anymore. She was not a forgotten prodigy. She was simply music, pure music, given human form. In the middle rows, a wealthy donor from Dublin wiped tears from his cheeks with a silk handkerchief. He had attended concerts at the finest halls in Europe. He had heard the greatest pianists of his generation, and yet somehow, this performance in a small Irish cathedral was moving him more deeply than any of them ever had. The children from the village school sat perfectly still, their young faces filled with wonder. They did not understand classical music. They could not name the piece or identify the composer, but they understood that something special was happening, something magical. They would remember this night for the rest of their lives. The music reached its climax, waves of sound crashing through the cathedral like a storm made of beauty. Sister Margaret's fingers flew faster, striking the keys with a power that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her physical body. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was exactly right. And then, slowly, the piece began to wind down. The thunder softened to rain, the rain to mist, the mist to a single drop of water falling into a still pond. The final notes drifted through the air, gentle as a whisper, soft as a prayer. Sister Margaret lifted her hands from the keys. Silence filled the cathedral once more. But this was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of 300 people who had just witnessed something holy. For a long moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the bishop rose to his feet. He brought his hands together in a single loud clap that echoed off the stone walls. And then everyone was standing, everyone was clapping. The sound built and built until it was like thunder. Like the storm that had raged the night before, only this storm was made of love and wonder and overwhelming gratitude. Sister Margaret sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. She had not cried like this in 62 years. She had not felt like this in 62 years. She was home. The applause continued for nearly 5 minutes. People stamped their feet. Some called out words that she could not hear over the noise. The children in the front row were jumping up and down, their earlier nervousness completely forgotten. Sister Margaret finally turned to face the audience. She saw the bishop, still clapping, tears shining on his face. She saw Mother Superior, standing with her hands clasped over her heart, nodding slowly, as if she had known all along. She saw Sister Bernadette, sobbing openly, mouthing words that looked like "I am sorry" over and over again. And in that moment, Sister Margaret understood something she had failed to grasp for more than 6 decades. She had never needed to choose between God and music. They had always been the same thing. Every note she played was a prayer. Every melody was an offering. The gift she had been given was not a distraction from her faith. It was an expression of it. She smiled through her tears and bowed her head. The applause roared on. The applause eventually faded. But the magic of that night did not. When Sister Margaret finally rose from the piano bench, her legs unsteady and her heart still racing, she found herself surrounded by people. Donors pressed forward to shake her hand. The bishop himself approached her with tears still wet on his cheeks, taking both her hands in his and calling her performance a gift from heaven. Sister Margaret accepted their praise with quiet grace, but she felt overwhelmed by the attention. For 62 years, she had lived in peaceful anonymity. Now, suddenly, everyone wanted to know who she was and where she had learned to play like that. She answered their questions as simply as she could. She told them she had played when she was young. She told them she had given it up many years ago. She did not mention Carnegie Hall or the life she had left behind. That part of her story was not hers to share. Not yet. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, especially when they are as extraordinary as this one. Among the guests that evening was an elderly gentleman from Dublin. He was 89 years old, retired now. But in his youth he had been one of Ireland's most respected music critics. He had spent his career attending concerts, writing reviews, and championing the finest pianists of his generation. He had heard thousands of performances over the decades, and he had never forgotten a single one. The moment Sister Margaret began to play, something stirred in his memory. The way her fingers moved across the keys, the particular emotion she brought to Chopin's phrases. The distinctive style that could not be taught, only born. He knew that style. He had written about it once, 65 years ago, in a review that had helped launch a young woman's international career. After the concert, while others crowded around Sister Margaret with their congratulations, the old critic hung back and watched. He studied her face, looking past the wrinkles and the years, and slowly, impossibly, recognition dawned. The next morning, he made a phone call to a friend at a Dublin newspaper. By afternoon, reporters were gathering outside the convent gates. The story broke the following day. The headline read, "The Lost Prodigy Found. Carnegie Hall pianist discovered living as nun after 62 years of silence." Suddenly, the whole world wanted to know about Sister Margaret. Or rather, about Maggie O'Brien, the young genius who had vanished from public life in 1962 and had never been seen again. Journalists dug up old photographs, old reviews, old recordings. They compared them to videos taken at the charity concert on mobile phones. There was no doubt. The frail old nun and the legendary young pianist were the same person. The attention was overwhelming. Camera crews camped outside the convent. Interview requests poured in from television stations across Europe and America. Everyone wanted Sister Margaret to tell her story. At first, she refused. She had not played for fame or recognition. She had played for the children at the orphanage, nothing more. The idea of becoming a public figure at 84 years old seemed absurd to her. But Mother Superior gently encouraged her to reconsider. "Your story could inspire so many people," she said one evening as they sat together in the chapel garden. "Think of all the souls out there who believe it is too late for them, who think their best days are behind them. You could show them that it is never too late to share their gifts." Sister Margaret thought about this for a long time. She thought about all the years she had wasted, all the music she had kept locked inside. She thought about the fear that had held her back, the belief that she had to choose between who she was and who she wanted to become. Finally, she agreed to give one interview. Just one. She chose a small local program rather than a big international network. She sat in a simple chair in the convent parlor, wearing her habit, her hands folded in her lap, and she told her story. She spoke about her childhood, about discovering her gift at a young age. She spoke about Carnegie Hall and the dizzying success that followed. She spoke about heartbreak, about losing herself in grief, about finding her way to God in the quiet of a chapel when she had nowhere else to turn. And she spoke about silence, 62 years of silence, 62 years of believing that she had to give up one love to embrace another. "I was wrong," she said softly, looking directly into the camera. "I thought God wanted me to sacrifice my music, but He never asked for that. I asked it of myself because I was afraid of being hurt again, afraid of failing, afraid of being seen." She paused, her eyes glistening. "If there is anyone watching this who has a gift they have been hiding, a dream they have been afraid to chase, I want you to know something. It is not too late. It is never too late. Your gift was given to you for a reason. Do not let fear steal it from you. Do not wait 62 years like I did." The interview was watched by millions. Letters poured into the convent from people all over the world. Men and women wrote to say that Sister Margaret's story had inspired them to pick up instruments they had not touched in decades. Others said they had finally found the courage to pursue dreams they had abandoned long ago. A woman from Australia wrote that she had reconciled with her estranged daughter after watching the interview, realizing that she had been hiding from love, just as Sister Margaret had hidden from music. But the greatest joy for Sister Margaret came not from the fame or the letters. It came from the orphanage. The charity concert had raised more money than anyone had imagined. The original goal had been enough to keep the orphanage open for another year. Instead, they raised enough to pay off all debts, renovate the building, and establish a permanent fund that would support the children for generations to come. And there was more. A wealthy donor who had attended the concert was so moved by Sister Margaret's performance that he made an additional gift. He donated a brand new piano to the orphanage, along with funding for music lessons for any child who wanted to learn. Sister Margaret became their teacher. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, she made the short journey from the convent to the orphanage. She would sit at the new piano, with children gathered around her, their small faces bright with curiosity. She taught them scales and simple songs. She told them stories about the great composers. She showed them that music was not just notes on a page, but a language of the heart. The children adored her. They called her Granny Piano, a name she cherished more than any title the critics had ever given her. When she played for them, they would sit in perfect silence, even the youngest ones, as if they understood that they were witnessing something special. Sister Margaret continued teaching until 3 weeks before her death. She passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 91, surrounded by the sisters who had become her family. The children from the orphanage sang at her funeral. They performed a simple arrangement of Chopin's Ballade, No. 1, the piece that had changed everything on that stormy night 7 years earlier. Hundreds of people attended the service. Some had traveled from other countries just to pay their respects. The bishop spoke about her faith and her service. Mother Superior spoke about her kindness and her quiet strength. And the old music critic from Dublin, now 96 and using a wheelchair, spoke about her genius. But it was one of the orphanage children who captured the truth most perfectly. A little girl of 10 years old stood up at the end of the service and read a poem she had written herself. "She taught us that music lives inside everyone," the girl read, her voice clear and steady. "She taught us that it is never too late to let it out. She taught us that love and fear cannot live in the same heart, and we have to choose which one to keep." Sister Margaret was buried in the convent cemetery, beneath an old oak tree that she had loved to sit under during warm summer evenings. Her gravestone was simple, just as she had requested. It read, "She played for the glory of God, and the world finally listened." But those who knew her best added something else. A small bronze plaque at the base of the stone, placed there by the children of the orphanage. It said simply, "Granny Piano. She taught us to sing." And if you visit that cemetery today, on quiet evenings when the wind is still, some say you can hear music drifting through the trees, soft and beautiful and full of love. The music she set free lives on.